I opened my first business. I have spent everything I have in my house. So I had my son 1 year. The 2 nights I living in the train, the 7 train. It changed a lot when they joined in the Grameen America.
There are 43 million people living in poverty in the United States of America, and women are disproportionately disadvantaged. Women receive only 4% of loan capital today. That's $1 out of $23.
Asking for a loan is not as easy as people think.
By not having the proper equipment, it made me feel kind of down, like, oh my goodness, if I just had enough pens, if I just had enough equipment, I could have gotten that deal. I could have gotten that order.
For our 100,000 members, Grameen America offers them an extraordinary opportunity to succeed. Through microloans, training and support, we're giving women all across the country a chance to run their own businesses and help them move up and out of poverty.
Our center meeting is sort of like a support group, because not only do we meet to repay the loans, but we help build each other confidence and spirits.
The group itself is very informative. There's so much information that you get. There's so many other outlets, different programs, different strategies of business that I'm learning.
You know, I wake up every single day inspired by our members. People ask me all the time, what can $1,500 do in the United States of America? I have 100,000 stories of what it can do. A little bit of capital can change lives.
At the beginning, you say $1,500 is not much, but when you put it at good use, $1,500 is a lot.
We were going through financial struggles at the business. It's helped us a lot when we needed it the most.
For my business, it changed a lot. Now I say thanks Green America because I have employees.
It helped me tremendously, because now I have my pens, so whenever someone called me, I could say, sure, I could take your order. You need 1,000 cupcakes? Sure, I could produce that.
I love my business because my business gives me many things for me and my family.
The money that they provide, I can multiply it. And in that way, I can provide a better education for them.
Today, Grameen America is the fastest growing microfinance organization in the United States of America. We've reached 100,000 women and will have given out $1 billion of loan capital as we close our 10th year. From sea to shining sea, from Austin to Charlotte to East Los Angeles, we've created over 105,000 jobs. And all the while, we've maintained an over 99% repayment rate. This is just the beginning. We know there's so much work left to do in this country, and Grameen America is committed to play our part. We're going to continue to expand our footprint to new cities and hard-to-reach communities all across the United States. We have technology at the fingertips of every single member across all of our cities. We'll be introducing wellness programs in every single one of our branches to make sure that the holistic services that we offer our members are more than just the loans themselves.
Grameen America is the best.
I feel that I can do this. I can be the businesswoman that I want to be.
We're just grateful and happy for everything that Grameen America does for us.
You can actually grow from being a small business owner and an entrepreneur to something much, much bigger.
I'm waiting in 2 weeks. I'm going to get another loan, and I already know what I'm going to do with it. And my goal is to open another store. And I know that I'm going to make it happen. We're going to make it happen.
The track record speaks for itself. There is no other investment with the kind of return that we have proven over and over again.
Join the movement.
To support women today,
We are 100,000
Women entrepreneurs strong.
and growing.
Thank you, Andrea, so much for being our change makers speaker this morning.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. How are you? It's nice to be here. So I just thought I would take a few minutes, and then we can move into a little bit of Q&A. But I just thought I would sort of cover 3 things this morning. One is a little bit about who am I and how did I have this passion early on for really investing in women, empowerment of women, and my own personal journey, and then a little bit more about Grameen America as just one of
what I believe are many, many opportunities to understand socially how to impact, invest, and have a return that I think is unparalleled. So just one thing that Kathleen didn't mention about me that I think is important as I start, because my life has come a little bit full circle, is that I am actually the product of a microloan. So my grandmother came here, immigrants from China, not speaking a single word of English, and definitively being a family in poverty. And she, not my grandfather, got an informal microloan. There was no Grameen at the time, but she started a hair business, a salon business. She started a little bit at a time. She hired 1 and then 2 employees. And just 1 generation later, my father went to MIT. And then, Kathleen gets to talk about my experience, my education, and everything that was simply the impact. And would have never happened had the woman in the family 2 generations ago been given a little bit of capital. So I can stand here and tell you that it can happen, first-hand experience, just in 1 single generation, that we can move families up and out of poverty right here in our own backyard, not just across the ocean. Thank you. The case has been made over and over again, and certainly gender equality is an important part of SDGs, but I think the case has been made that you've probably read in reports out of Davos that if we simply had equal representation, equal pay, and equal access to capital, we would create $30 trillion of global GDP growth. So that the facts are there in terms of giving women the equal human rights for, again, equal pay, equal financial inclusion. Kind of how to do that continues to be the question, but the case is made economically that one of the biggest ways, the biggest emerging market in the world, is not a country, it is women. It is economically empowering women. And I had sort of firsthand the opportunity to get involved in this. I graduated from Princeton, and I had wanted to go to the Peace Corps. And at that time, my family, who were certainly not in poverty anymore due to that first microloan, but didn't have a lot of money, and I had loans to repay, said, look, you have to make a choice. It's nice that you want to go back and make social impact, but you need to get a job. So I thought in those early days that they were 2 different paths. So I took a job, and not until I got to Avon in 1993 did I realize that there really actually could be sort of a blending of and purposeful work in the private sector. And I remember sitting with the then CEO, who was the 8th CEO of the company and a man, and there was a plaque behind his desk, and it was 4 footprints, and it had a barefoot ape, then a barefoot man, then a wingtip shoe, and then a high heel pump, and it said the evolution of leadership. And there were no women CEOs at the time. And I said, wow, that plaque behind your desk, it's really great. And he said, listen, we try and empower Avon ladies all over the world. Someday, a woman should be the CEO of this company. Little did I know, I didn't even have the job yet, but little did I know that, again, about 6 years later, I in fact did have the opportunity to become the CEO of the company, and he gave me that plaque wrapped up in a little bow, and it's still behind my desk. But it was the beginning of understanding from, sort of breaking through in women in leadership, that also as a woman in leadership, the responsibility was not just to have the job, but then to empower others, not just in management, but actually in our business model. And what I loved from the day I understood Avon was that while a lot of people think it was selling skincare and lipsticks, in fact, it really was, in my mind, about selling the earnings opportunity. The company was founded in 1886 by a very prescient man who was a door-to-door salesman, and when he was going around door-to-door selling encyclopedias, he had a friend who gave him a little perfume vial, and so he said, you know what, I'll go at Christmas time and see if the women who are answering the doors want to buy the encyclopedias if they get a perfume as a gift with purchase. And instead of what he perceived as their reaction, they said, we really don't want the books. We just want the perfume, number 1. And number 2, can we sell it? So that began in 1886, 34 years before women could vote in the United States, the beginning of Avon, which was the concept of empowering women with their own independent financial opportunity to earn money apart from their husbands. It was heretical at the time. There were a lot of people that did not think women should be going out of the house selling. But in fact, again, 125 years later, it continues to be the driving force of the corporation. So sort of firsthand, and we had philanthropic work, and we had public-private partnerships with the State Department, et cetera, about women's empowerment. But the model itself, purposeful business, socially important business, even as a private Fortune 500 company, was sort of beginning to really change, A, my life, and B, my perspective on how really a little bit of capital to women, and this was from a for-profit private sector company, could actually change lives. I'll never forget sitting in an audience or speaking with 5,000 women in Istanbul, Texas, and we had a woman, Avon representative, who stood on stage, who, because of religious reasons, her husband forbid her to work. They lost everything in an earthquake, some 50 miles outside of Istanbul, everything, house, home belongings, and so against his knowledge, she went to work selling Avon. She became the #1 seller in the country. She stood on stage and said that she bought everything back. She got their home, all their furnishings from her earnings, and that she was the only woman in her mosque and in her community whose husband came home and cooked dinner for her. And we had 5,000 women standing up on the chairs because, even in any part of the world, what we saw was the opportunity for women to have a little bit of a hand up, not a handout. And that is where this thought, the broadest thought of investing in women, not just giving them something, but teaching them that they could run their own businesses, became extremely powerful and really part of my life's mission and work. So when I retired from Avon at the end of 2012, I had the opportunity to meet with Muhammad Yunus at a Fortune panel. There were 5 of us who were Fortune 500 CEOs, and Muhammad Yunus, who had just won the Nobel Prize for microcredit in Bangladesh. And I remember being extraordinarily inspired, thinking, by the way, that this was a great pragmatic solution to get capital to women in Bangladesh, which then spread to India and Africa, but that it was clearly an emerging market solution for poverty alleviation. And I remember him telling the story that in the earliest days he was an economist and a professor, not a banker, that in Bangladesh, the poorest country on earth, 51% of the population were women, and if you were a woman 40 years ago in Bangladesh and you went to get a loan, you were refused. The answer was, bring your husband back in, and then we'll talk about it. So that was #1, complete 100% exclusion from the formal capital markets. But then, again, history had its own issues because he began to give small loans out in the countryside, little $20 loans, if you would, equivalent in US dollars. And his small team was coming back with, you know what, this is not really going to work because they are saying, don't give me the money, give my husband the money because I do not understand the language of finance. And I'm looking out at all of us today in 2018, but he went back 40 years ago and said, that is history speaking, not you. A woman can be an entrepreneur and manage and understand the language of money equally. It is our society, not you, who have caused that answer. So they went back and said, listen, if you just take a little bit of money, you can buy a chicken. If that chicken lays eggs, you can sell those eggs. You can then pay us back, and you have earned credit. And credit is a basic human right. And his belief was just simply that poverty comes from the lack of economic financial oxygen. That if he compared it to a bonsai trees, if you have 2 seeds and you put one in a constrained box, the tree will grow this big. If you put it with oxygen and air and water, it can grow that big, same seed, the constraint. So his belief is that the poverty in Bangladesh, and certainly in the emerging world, was really created by the fact that society and the formal capital markets were in fact only giving to those who have money. I think that's true today in 2018, even more so since 2008. But even back then, 40 years ago, that banks, whose original design was to give money to people who needed money, was not in fact playing out, that banks were giving money to those who had it. And that very simple thought said, let's turn that whole model on its head and create a bank for the poor. No recourse, no collateral, gave to men and women alike. In those early days, if you've read, the repayment rate was 40 plus points lower for men than women. Of course, there was the natural narrative, what men spent money on, but the real reason is that men had alternative options for capital, that it was one of many loans. And for women, it was the only organization that trusted them to pay them back. And the loyalty and the gratitude, because no other organizations were giving loan capital, was the inception of the Grameen Bank, which now serves well over 8 million women and their families in Bangladesh, and is one of the largest and most profitable banks, although a social impact bank. Not a dollar is given to shareholders, it's poured back into the community and into more membership. So in 2008, in the world's debt crisis and the time when I think people would say, who would start a lending organization to the poorest families and women in the United States of America when banks were shrinking and pulling back, no recourse, no collateral. And the vision was, this is when people need it the most. And so it began just a kind of subway ride away in Queens, New York. We started when no one knew Grameen. No one really understood, and there was a lot of skepticism about microfinance and whether it would work in the richest nation, quote, in the richest city of the richest nation in the world. And I can tell you that in the very first original branch, which was started in 2018, 10 years later, we've served 10% of the women in poverty in that borough. We have actually made, if you would, in terms of interest income profit, nearly $2 million in that original branch. It is completely not only self-sustainable, but has in fact been able to plow that money back into helping us open the Harlem branch and funding and fueling more and more members in the community. So as Kathleen said, we've now reached $1 billion in terms of loans dispersed to over 100,000 women and their families in the United States. For those of you, many of you involved in the financial world, much more a banker than myself, I will tell you that this is probably one staggering number. We have written off $1.2 million, $1.2 million in 10 years on $1 billion of non-recourse loans to those who would be absolutely deemed non-credit worthy. It is the system of trust. It is the access to capital. They would never receive a loan from a formal financial bank. They do not have a credit score, or they have a poor credit score. They are unbanked. 1 out of 2 female-headed households that is unbanked in the United States of America in 2018. So what we offer as an organization are 3 things. Number 1 is the access to the capital itself, and I'll talk about how that's funded. Second is, although we are not a bank, so we are not FDIC insured, we have partners who are savings bank partners all across the country, and they give concessionary first-time bank accounts to our members. Asset building is critically important. The statistic today is that if in the United States you don't have at least $800 of savings as a family, one emergency, and it puts you right back down underneath that poverty line. So for us, it's really critical that no matter how small their businesses are, they learn to save $3, $5, $10 a week, and that $800 is a very important goal for any Grameen member to get a loan over $10,000, which grows over time. They have to prove that they have assets of $800 to $1,000, because we think that the asset building behavior is a critical one. And there is proof in this country, yes, that 7 times more likelihood that your child will go to ongoing education if you have $800 in your bank account. 7 times difference versus living just week to week and having no savings. So the behavior is critical. And the third thing, which is interesting, is that we give a credit score. We partner with Experian and others, and our average credit score in 26 weeks, so just 6 months, is close to 670. Which is pretty amazing, as we know. Now, interestingly, it is a byproduct of our program, not a requirement of our program. We don't require a credit score. We require discipline and commitment. But an output is the credit score, which they can use, whether it's rent, lowering their utility bill, getting a phone bill, or any other thing that gives the woman in the family her own credit score. And the staggering number of women who do not have independent credit scores is huge. And this is one further product. So those are the 3 products in the program. So as I said, sort of the first, in terms of impact and impact metrics of the program, certainly one of the things that we measure is income boost. And that from the time they start till the time they get 2 loan cycles, 4 loan cycles, what is the incremental income boost so that they can move up and out of poverty, which is $22,000 and change for a family of 4 in the United States. So we obviously measure, like many microfinance programs, the actual movement of income boost. Very importantly, we measure jobs created. So obviously, if I'm a micro entrepreneur, I just met with someone in Los Angeles yesterday who started off with a $1,200 loan baking cookies in her apartment. Today, she runs a bakery. She wants to open a second one. She has 6 employees, so she has created 6 jobs in addition to her own. So we look at job creation for our members, and the third, obviously, is assets and credits. And they have saved millions of dollars collectively, as well as credit scores that average close to 670. And that, in fact, we think is positive movement. One of the things that we have done that will be coming out in November, which is very powerful, it was quite controversial and not easy to administrate, but we are the only microfinance program in the United States that invested and had Robinhood, a foundation here in New York, invest in a randomized controlled trial. So a very independent piece of research that has taken 4 years. And the first findings are coming out in November, at the end of November, that are extraordinarily positive on many, many metrics, particularly hardship alleviation. But I can tell you that I see it every day, but to have objective impact metrics, not only financially on their lives versus the control group of entrepreneurs who did not receive loan capital, but also the behavioral and sociological, attitudinal changes as well, are sort of some of the statistical positive outliers that they have not seen before in any kind of research. One of the things that's critical is our loans must be used for entrepreneurial reasons. They cannot be used to refinance consumer debt. They can't be used for back pay of rent. They have to be used, and they are monitored and checked that they are used for businesses. So we have, in fact, reached scale. To give you the idea of what this looks like going forward, we are in 14 cities now, opening up in Houston next week. We just opened Miami last year. It's quite fast. But I think most people really do believe that microfinance is a poverty alleviation tool for the third world, not for the United States. And I unfortunately have been all over the United States and will tell you that you can go to neighborhoods in Oakland, in Seattle, where you almost are staring up at the Amazon offices, where wealth is being created at huge rates, and the income inequality issues, right, you can see the Amazon offices. You can probably see Jeff's office from the biggest tent cities and poverty that I have seen. And I have been to Seattle for many years over the last 20, and it is as bad as I've ever seen it. And that is true 2 subway stops away from here, that again, we are talking about income inequality that is not being addressed. I would argue it is worsening in the United States versus other emerging markets where there are attempts to close that. So when we are looking at the fact that a handful of people in this country are making more than 60% of the population of this country. So 8 people, I believe, are making more than 8 individuals have more income than 60% of this country. The question is, there are many, and it's a complicated issue on wealth redistribution, but I'm a huge believer that, like Muhammad Yunus says, credit is a basic human right. And if we put it in the hands of women, we will see that not just financially, but from a health, education, and all the other things that many times are different streams. When we look at SDGs, integrating them, I'm a big believer that microfinance is hardly the only solution to poverty alleviation and our societal issues. But without economic fuel, the opportunity, again, it's a hand up, not a hand out. It is a nonpartisan, bipartisan, who doesn't want to put people to work. This is not an entitlement program. It is simply investing, using the word with a capital I, investing in women, giving them a chance, and the return is huge. $1 in our program in 10 years yields 25. $1 invested because of the repayment rate. The loan cycles are every 6 months, and the repayment rate is 99.7%. Because of that, if you invest $1 in Grameen, in 10 years, $25 would be given out. If I take it to a larger scale, if we try and raise $100 million, of investment fuel and access to capital. That will yield in 10 years $2.5 billion of loan capital given out to nearly 500,000 women and their families in the United States, which begins to be a material impact on poverty. I joined after I got out because I believed that Eunice had a social model that had a sustainability point of view. To me, if there's not a sustainable formula, it's hard to get at scale. I felt like, I could be on the board or I could write a check, but if I was going to devote my time and my for-profit CEO experience, because social investors want to invest in leadership, no different than in the private sector, just as much as they want to do on impact investment, the best thing I could do is bring my experience and my leadership. It's a bank. It's a business. It just happens to be a socially driven business. Our shareholders are not, looking for my earnings per share. They're looking for different metrics that you all are looking at. But we needed leadership and hoped that by example, rather than going to work for, in my case, a private equity firm and, working on deals 3 days a week, that I could actually devote my time as a private sector CEO in my second chapter, actually trying to address one of the biggest issues, but one of the very pragmatic opportunities to make a difference. So it has scale. We've given out $1 billion in 10 years. Next year, with just 2 more locations, we will give out $450 million. So 45% of the first decade will be dispersed in 2019, and after 2020, it becomes $1 billion a year. So that by the time we look out, in the next decade, we will have given out $12 billion. And the capital, though, is very difficult to do as a 501c3. We started off as philanthropic capital. Then we moved to friendly patient loans, CRA loans, but they were small. My average cost of capital was less than 2%, maybe 1.5%. But our debt to equity ratio was tiny. At the scale that we're at now, what we're looking for are really raising social impact funds where principal can get interest, where tenor is important. We want 5 years, I think, to be patient, if we define it. But friendly patient capital, which really allows people to put their money to work, whether they are family foundations, corporations, large national foundations. And this, I think, is something with our track record over 10 years that is one of the best investments that can be made in terms of something that not only works, but has proven material scalable impact right here in the United States. So I just come back to, before I answer questions, and we have a little bit of a moderated and then open Q&A, the fact that, I am standing here, I am proof positive that it really can make a difference in a life, and it only takes, not even barely, a generation. We have 43 million people that are living in poverty. Women are disproportionately affected. Women are disproportionately affected with loan capital. $1 out of $23 in 2016 went to a woman's entrepreneur. When you look at low-income minorities, that number doesn't even register on the Richter scale. There are a lot of complicated issues around gender equality that are going to take some time, but investing in women, literally, investing in women by giving them the access to fuel and capital, which they cannot get in the formal capital markets, in my mind, is one of the best ways that we can get our country, our cities back up on their feet. And, as someone who's been involved in it, I guess I just share this with you. I just said to myself, which I hope you feel, and I'm looking out here, if not now, then when? And if not me, then who? So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So that's pretty inspiring. So this is an investment audience, and we understand that Grameen America has a particular approach to investing. What would you say to an audience like this who is mobilizing private capital for a financial return, traditional investments, how would you describe your fund to them as a fund? You are going to be launching a fund or have launched a fund for this community. Is that right?
Yes.
So what type of a fund, how big do you see that fund becoming? Where do you see it in their portfolios?
You know, we are looking now over the next few years to raise at least $200 million, $200 to $250 billion of loan capital for fueling another 350,000 families in the United States. These businesses are through the women in the family, so the loanee will be the woman. There hasn't been a business that I've visited lately that the whole family hasn't been involved, so it is not exclusively women that are benefiting from these loans. But just to be very clear that the loaning and the agreement, the trust is between the organization and the woman, because we want women in this country who are disproportionately shut out of the financial system, who don't have credit scores and who are unbanked, to have an equality of participation of financial inclusion. That's the simple reason. So the women, 350,000 more women in 20 more locations, from Chicago to Detroit to cities that we are not in today, can be accessed if we raise another $250 million over the next several years to fund the loan capital. So a dollar investment, as I said, yields 12 times in 5 years, and the investor rolls it over again in 10 years. It's a 25-time investment because we have a track record of 99.7%. I say that, and we actually had PwC, our auditors, actually stress test it and audit it, because when I said it's nearly 100%, people were like, yeah, I'm sure it's good. I'm sure it's good. But it is literally 100% on non-collateral loans over 10 years in 14 cities. So it's not a trial or a pilot. I mean, it's a proven, sustainable model. So the risk is almost nothing. The return, our livelihoods changed. And we believe that we can, with this program, start to approach and affect 10% of women in poverty in the United States across this country, which takes it from being a nice NGO and a nice fast-growing microfinance organization to a scalable solution that needs partnerships with families, partnerships with foundations, partnerships with government. It needs fuel, because I cannot raise this philanthropically, a dollar at a time. And we have now got a model that doesn't require that. Do we want grants to start up a new city? Absolutely. But the lion's share of the funding is not fundraising. The lion's share of the funding is social impact investing, is impact investment vehicles that get a return. We need some patience, we can give a return, and we have first loss guarantee of anywhere from, our first fund was 20%, our second one we have people coming in for 15% because of the people that are backing it, who range from the Dalio Foundation, Ray Dalio and his foundation, to Annenberg, and we have so many funders and friends of Grameen in the early 10 years who believe deeply that this program works, are willing to back it.
Great. What would you like to see members of this community do in support of what you're doing? This is a social impact group in general.
Yeah, I mean, I think I heard a little bit about some of the discussion earlier, and just in my personal, never mind Grameen, belief that we are at an inflection point for impact investing. I think the issues have been, how do we look at the metrics? Are the ideas are good, really are the metrics there? And then, how do we, in fact, understand people in this room being the least who we have to convince? Can you all hear me better? Could you hear me before? Do I need to make my pitch again? Sorry. I think that my overarching comment here, without trying to be selling Grameen America, is just take it out from that on this issue of gender equality, that if we want to affect the issue, I think it's going not to happen from the public sector. I think it is going to happen from public-private partnerships, and I think it is going to happen from social investment. I think that Impact investing is a way where we can put sort of the original capitalist mentality, again with social metrics, into play, because we need scaled solutions that need investment from people who understand and want metrics in return. Investing in women's businesses, women's owned businesses, is, I think, one of the fastest ways to get that return. Seen it firsthand, as I said. It's not just a 99% repayment rate, but over time, over decades, and over the world, country by country, when you invest and a woman earns $1, that impact socially back to health, education, and community is known. And it's, so as far as I'm concerned, it's the best way to put your money literally to work.
How big do you think this fund could be?
So $1 billion. I mean, yeah, I can think bigger than that, but we want to start over the next few years raising another $250 million. But if you want to take the, the number of women living in poverty and the number of cities that we can actually pragmatically expand to over the next 5 to 10 years, we need $1 billion of funding.
Is there a difference between what you did at Avon with women entrepreneurs and the women entrepreneurs that are funded through Grameen?
Yeah, I mean, that's that question I'm often asked. What are the similarities? Most people say, well, my goodness, that's a huge departure. You ran Avon for 13 years, you were there for 20 years, and now you've decided to go to Grameen. How did you make that career jump? It's so different. And my answer is, there are aspects that are different, but there are more things that are the same than not. Telling you a little bit about my journey earlier, you can probably see that. But the Avon representative, who was a small entrepreneur running a small business, was not at the depths of poverty, so to speak. Our average income was still low income, but higher, not in poverty. So the average income of an Avon representative was $45,000, still low. And it was the best either incremental earnings opportunity or very flexible earnings opportunity. Many of the Avon representatives were unable to afford childcare, but they could do it on their terms and their time and sell when they had an opportunity, as opposed to going to a minimum wage job where you had to show up at 8:30 and stay till 5:30. So it was a very flexible earnings opportunity, but the investment in her, in the case of Avon, was micro lending, so to speak, in terms of we extended her credit on the first order. So if you came to be an Avon representative, you didn't have to find money to buy inventory. We fronted her the first order. So at any given time, we had billions of dollars of credit out, if you would, and saw very similarly the lack of bad debt. But we trusted that once she sold it, she would repay us, but she didn't have to have the income first. So we fronted her that first order. So that was our version through products of microcredit, if you would. What we saw there was very much the same thing, though, that the skills were equal to the capital, in our case, products. The training was critical, and that I see at Grameen America. Our members must be in poverty. If you are qualified, if you are in poverty. The underwriting is very untraditional. There's no business plan that's necessary. It's simply a commitment. You have to come for 5 days for financial training. If you don't show up for those 5 days, you won't get your loan. The number of people who can't invest the time to get the training give us a very good indication that they will not be a good risk. Once they invest those 5 days, they get that first loan, which is anywhere up to $2,000, so it is small. You saw some examples of some of the women, but they're extraordinary. And one of the number one questions I get asked all the time is, what can $1,500 do in the United States? And they're inspirational stories and amazing stories of the entrepreneurship and the innovation. I met a woman in the Bronx the other day who was a cleaning lady. She worked for a family that trusted her. They told her, here's a credit card because the carpet cleaners, the institutional carpet cleaners are coming in to clean the carpets. Will you just give them the credit card and sign? When she saw how much the companies charged to have rugs cleaned, she took a $1,500 loan, went to Home Depot, bought a carpet cleaning machine, began to upcharge and clean carpets. Today, she's in the rental equipment business. She has 4 employees. She rents equipment and doesn't clean houses anymore. So that's an example of what $1,500 can do in the United States of America.
Great. So I think we have time for maybe 2 questions. I'd just like to, the mics are over here. Please just come to the mic. Peter?
Hi, thank you. That was very inspiring.
Thank you.
You may have said it earlier, I came in a little late, but is there an opportunity for volunteering to come in and act as a mentor? Because, some of the families that we work with love to get their children involved in some of the work that they do. And if seasoned business people want to come in and help to mentor some of these potential borrowers, it seems like it would be a great way to introduce people to the program.
Absolutely. We've been here for 10 years, and in the beginning, our focus was just sort of getting the loan capital out, and volunteering in the branch operation was a little bit more difficult because we're handling money. I mean, we didn't want to put anyone at risk for whether it's really a banking transaction. But in our second decade, as we've gotten more and more members who need more help with everything from how do I set up a Yelp account if I'm a little restaurant, or I'm not comfortable with social media, but I know that I should do this. We are looking to really sort of establish volunteer programs, particularly for students. So I'd be happy to talk about that. That's something that we're looking at.
Hi. How do you, you said that you're expanding outside of New York, is that right, to other cities?
Yes.
How do you determine the expansion plan and what cities you choose to work in?
It's a great question, and I will tell you that the original answer was where the money was. And I guess my business lens. So, I mean, we have, and I'll just use an example, we were in Omaha, Nebraska. We were lucky enough to have a very important funder there who liked the program. But when I looked at the cities, I really thought, if we were a business, as opposed to a typical nonprofit, which is going to follow the money, we're going to look at this thing from a business lens. So we had Boston Consulting Group, who has been extraordinary in giving us pro bono help to literally look at a heat map of the United States to really study the need state of women over 18, unbanked or underbanked, women over 18, unemployed or underemployed, where the density of poverty is by zip code, and they have given us a roadmap, if you would, geographically, that allows us to know where the need is, whereby then we hope to raise the funds. And at this point, we're just so successful everywhere that what we want is the fund and the social impact investment to be national, to be able to be used, not because I live here and I want my money to be used in my backyard, but because as a business, this is where the need is in the United States. So that's been a shift. So we have a very objective look at the United States and where the program should have density.
One follow-up question that I get that those are markets, clearly growth markets for growth businesses. What about how do you address the challenge that some of the most needy markets get left behind based on those heat maps, like Columbus or Cleveland or, anyway, so just a thought.
Yeah, well, actually, the neediest markets are sometimes come up at the top. So it's not the growth markets, it's where the density of poverty and the need is the worst.
Okay, cool.
So, it's not, we happen to be in Austin, just to give you an example, very specifically because we had major funding in Austin. But if you look at Austin, the fastest growing growth market, income demographics, we should have been in San Antonio or Houston before we should have been in Austin. So the lens has shifted to where the depth of the poverty is. So actually Cleveland comes up high. And so that's the switch. So it's not where the biggest growth is, but unfortunately where the biggest poverty issue and lack of access to financial capital is. Thanks.
How is technology changing the profile of your female entrepreneurs?
Well, it's really interesting because when I joined the organization in 2014, we were, you'll be stunned by this, but we were taking cash back as a repayment every week. So if I took out a $1,500 loan and my weekly repayment for 26 weeks was $63 and I was trained what was interest and what was principal, people were bringing back $63 every week to the meeting to pay us back. And the first thing we thought is, A, we have to become cashless, But B, what is the technology solution to that? And many people said, well, it's a cash economy and an informal economy for many micro businesses, and they don't have computers and enough money if they're poor, but every single person had a smartphone. It may have not been an iPhone XS Plus, but it was a smartphone. So we spent a year and a half funded by several large corporations doing an entire digital banking transformation so that today every single one of our 100,000 members gets a text receipt on her repayment. There's no cash exchanged, and she is mobile banking, if you would, with her smartphone. She may not have a computer, but she has a smartphone, and she's learned to do business with Grameen. We don't take cash. We don't have paper. So that, in my mind, was not just an efficiency move for the organization, but it really began the access to education about technology for our members. So as well as access to capital, financial capital, we're teaching them access to technology tools that in the 21st century, their customers aren't going to want to pay cash. They don't want to take cash in their food truck because that's dangerous and they're going to get robbed. And so how do we convert them? That's become a very big change. So that delta is happening. The final place is, I think, the use of even social media. Like I said, Yelp, or how can they expand and grow their businesses through technology? So we are looking at things like a member app and a member platform.
Okay, I'm sorry. We are going to have to cut it off here. I know.
One more?
Okay,
one more.
All right, Joan, that's it. Keep it short.
Okay, I'll grab you later, Andrea. Thank you.
Okay, Andrea, thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you very much.